Hi, everybody. Welcome to my Sunday evening live YouTube sessions. I thought at least I would try and do a quick session today, only because I thought a few people might be interested in just finding out effectively the consequences of everything that's happened on the last day of the season from the Premier League perspective, really. So we obviously have Liverpool champions, Man City finishing second. Obviously, then Man United and Chelsea getting the all-important third and fourth places for Champions League qualification. We obviously got the decision from Man City recently that allowed them to play in competition for next season based on the CAS decision. And as importantly, at the bottom of the table, even though Norwich were already confined to relegation before the last game of the season, it was in the end, unfortunately, Bournemouth and Watford that were relegated in 19th and 18th places, respectively. So what I just wanted to do maybe for 5 or 10 minutes was to just go through some of the finances, a few of the legal consequences, and just to set the picture basically for what is ultimately a pretty eventful last day as well. And then maybe just spend a little bit of time talking about the playoff games that are happening at the moment and what actually that might be worth for the team that ultimately win the playoffs to get into the Premier League season, the Premier League for next season. Now, what I was going to do is probably just talk about three things. One is TV monies specifically and what particular clubs are likely to earn. The second thing I wanted to discuss then was Champions League qualification. That's obviously very important for Chelsea and Man U that have got in. The third was going to be then just touching on relegation for those clubs and parachute payments and discussing what they are briefly. And then talking about a couple of bonuses. It might be for Champions League bonuses. It might be relegation reduction clauses. It might be release clauses in cases of relegation, etc. And you might see just a couple of the pictures or the shirts on the wall just behind me. All of those are to auction off basically for charity, for my 13 charity. So if any of you guys want to get in touch, bid for any of the items, etc. We've got a couple have already been taken, but we've got a Luca Vialli shirt, an Axel Witsel shirt, Gerrard shirt, etc. And I'll be getting some more shortly. Do feel free just to get in touch in my usual social channels and let me know. So just very briefly, in terms of the first point. So in terms of TV monies and the consequences now for the clubs throughout the Premier League. Well, I think the first point is I think a lot of the teams will obviously be over the moon that the season was completed, especially, COVID lockdown and Project Restart that happened. There were obviously significant financial consequences for not finishing the season. It's been reported that there will be some rebates that will be paid to the broadcasters, but they obviously wouldn't have been anywhere near as significant as if the season had been null and void and hadn't been finished. So that I think would be a huge relief for the clubs and for the owners especially, and for the broadcasters as well, who've obviously been able to broadcast quite a lot of the games. But if we model what is likely to be the types of financial figures, it's important just to actually understand how broadcasting rights or the commercial broadcasting rights are distributed in the Premier League. And for this, and I'd all recommend everyone to be able to do this, is just to go to the Swiss Ramble Twitter feed. It's at Swiss Ramble, and he's done a fantastic job at modelling some particularities or peculiarities of this season, of talking about specific figures and going into a little bit of detail about those. So I highly recommend following Swiss Ramble, and I've taken a couple of insightful figures from his brilliant Twitter feeds. So if at least we compare this season to last season, as everyone will know, Manchester City won the league last season, and it's around £151 million. That's simply broadcasting rights and some commercial revenues that the central Premier League commercial revenues maintain for clubs. Liverpool actually finished second, but earned more, and £152 million because they were on TV a couple more times. And the way that those revenues are effectively split out is that there's an equal share, which is 50% of all of domestic TV. Overseas revenues made up last season an equal share as well. And then effectively each place after TV monies and the amount of times you've been on, a minimum time, would effectively fetch you around £12 million. And then every game after that was worth another million or so. The merit payments, i.e. where you finished in the league, were worth around £1.9 million. we believe, based on some models that Swiss Ramble came up with, that taking into account COVID, it's likely to be in the mid to high 2 million ranges. So for every place that a team finishes in the league, it's a multiplier of where that team has effectively finished. So Manchester City and Liverpool earning significant amounts. What does that mean for this season? Well, the modelling suggests that Liverpool are likely to earn around £174 million for finishing top of the league. Manchester City around £168 million. And then bottom place, Norwich, earning around £94 million, which means that Watford and Bournemouth as well, the relegated clubs, will earn probably in the regions of the mid to high £90 million range, which is obviously still a significant amount. I think then the second point I just wanted to touch on, then bearing in mind we're still talking about Norwich, Watford and Bournemouth, is relegation and what that relegation cost effectively is to those clubs. Obviously, it's a very, very difficult time to be going into the EFL, simply because of the relative chasm of not having those fans in stadia, commercial revenue suffering to a large extent, and the broadcasting deal not being as significant. And that is why, for those clubs, the parachute payments, i.e. the amounts that cushion the fall that are provided to those clubs from the Premier League for the seasons that the club, for at least 2 seasons, possibly 3 seasons, that a club then is in the Championship, are significant. And some of those figures have been very significant. So, for example, Swiss Ramble mentioned that in the 2018-19 season, Swansea and Stoke, for example, got upwards of £42 million for that one season. And they're usually staggered between 2 and 3 seasons, as I said. So parachute payments can be worth upwards collectively of even 80 to 90 million pounds for a relegated club. The point obviously being is that those broadcasting revenues that the club would have got if they had been in the Premier League are no longer. So there is a huge, relatively large revenue drop. And as I was going to mention, but I'll probably mention it now quickly as well, some of those contractual clauses become very important. So, for example, high earners that are on big wages might have negotiated, the club might have negotiated relegation reduction clauses. Sometimes those clauses can be between 20 and 50%. I think if it's the higher end, the players' agents are likely, even though they're contractually bound to accept the lower amounts, are looking to probably move on those players in any event. So that's something to consider. The other point also might be that there might be a clause, a relegation release clause, which might be for a particular set amount that player can actually move on, which is going to be probably at a lower level than if the club was remaining in the Premier League too. And the other bit on the flip side, and we'll go into Champions League qualification in a second, especially for Chelsea and Manchester United attaining that on the last, effectively on the last day of the season, is that there will be significant bonuses for those players for reaching the Champions League group stage, which is pretty lucrative. And then that was the last thing really I wanted to talk about now, which is effectively, Manchester City and Liverpool's Champions League qualification have been guaranteed for a number of weeks. Leicester were obviously in the mix for a long time, and obviously their results have dropped off to a degree. And in the end, Chelsea and Manchester United have pipped Leicester to those 3rd and 4th places, and that really is pretty significant for a number of reasons. But if I take you through some of the numbers very briefly in any event, so and this is based on the 2018-19 Champions League distribution figures that are available actually on the UEFA website. So for the 32 teams that qualified for the Champions League group stage, they automatically get 14.5 million euros. And then for those group stage games, they get 2.7 million euros for a win, 900,000 euros for a draw. And there's then additional prize money for keeping on going in the tournament for longer and longer. So, for example, if you reach the last 16, it's 9.5 million, quarterfinals, 10.5 million, semi-final 12, final 15, and the winners receive 19. Now, that is not including all of the stadium and commercial revenues. It's not including what's called the TV pool monies as well, and UEFA coefficient monies, which have actually changed in this last season. So if you want to know all of those figures, I don't tend to go into too much detail on those points right now. I'd really recommend going to the UEFA website. It's actually also in my book Done Deal, of how those structures and how those changes to the UEFA distributions work. But if I give you some headline figures, for example, Liverpool, for winning the Champions League last season, earned 111 million euros. It wasn't actually the largest distribution by UEFA. Barcelona actually earned 117 million euros. In part, that was because the TV pool, i.e. the monies that the national broadcasters from each country pay, was significant enough because other teams in Spain didn't reach the end parts of the campaign, which then gave Barcelona more of that share. So that is why it is so significant, effectively, for Chelsea and Manchester United to have got those Champions League places. One, because they'll know that they'll be guaranteed a decent amount of money from getting into the group stages and possibly beyond. The second point is, though, even though that's the case, they'll have to give quite a lot of, or a significant part of all of those additional revenues to players by way of qualifying for the Champions League for next season. It shouldn't be underestimated, actually. For example, Manchester United have a clause with Adidas which says if they don't qualify 2 years in a row for Champions League, then their deal gets automatically reduced to a degree. So, and I'm sure it might be the same for the commercial sponsors as well. So, you know, and ultimately, from a club recruitment perspective, being able to have to be able to recruit players knowing that you're going to be in the Champions League and be as attractive as possible is obviously, you know, a significant deal. So that's where we are really at the moment. We've got really, from a Champions League perspective, probably the best part of 70 to 80 million euros, maybe a little bit lower or higher, depending on the performance of those teams in next season. But as you can see from Liverpool's run to the final and winning it, you know, 111 million euros is obviously a hugely significant sum. And if you remember from one of the YouTube pieces I did a while back, that Liverpool were actually supposedly the first ever club to break the 250 million pound mark for broadcasting distributions. And that was a point that Swiss Ramble made about 6 or 7 months ago. So that's what I wanted to talk about there. It was how Premier League broadcasting monies are distributed, and estimating really what Liverpool are going to earn for winning the league and Norwich for finishing bottom. I then went into a little bit of detail about parachute payments and relegation and the significance of relegation as a result. And then the third point was the significance, again, of Champions League participation for especially Chelsea and Manchester United, who have guaranteed that participation for next season. So thanks very much for joining me. I've got a couple of questions that are coming in that I'm going to have a discussion about. So please feel free to ask some questions. I'll send the Swiss Ramble link so you can have a look at the detail as well. So we've got a question from Rijul. If they go further down, like Sunderland, are they still handed out that kind of handouts from the Premier League? Yes. So the only way that the parachute payments are not provided is if the team then gets re-promoted to the Premier League. So those parachute payments that would have been made are effectively not provided to the club because they get the benefit of being back in the Premier League. And the regulation was adjusted by the Premier League so that whereas previously it had been a potential 3-year parachute, or 4 years it was in years gone by, is that varies now depending on the club and how long they have stayed in the Premier League for. So there can be a couple of variables there. Augustine's come with a point. So do you think Tottenham can retain its key players despite not playing Champions League in the upcoming season? Yeah, it's a great question. Well, there's always a few things to bear in mind there. The first is I think it was the Price of Football on his podcast recently said that Spurs' wage to turnover ratio was one of the lowest in the league, which obviously goes some way to show the tight rein that Daniel Levy keeps on finances, and particular salaries. They've no doubt got large salaries, and that might be for players like Kane, Dele Alli, Son, Lloris, and others. But I think ultimately what is going to be the issue more is the large finance payments on the new stadium. And ultimately, that might feed into how much Spurs can actually spend this season, how attractive they are as a proposition from not being in the Champions League. Even though I think they're in Europa League. That was qualification was confirmed today with their win, I think, against Wolves. So that is more the issue. It's being attractive enough as a Europa League club, at least for next season, with Jose Mourinho in charge. And then being able to invest enough to keep those players. But again, on the whole, Spurs have done a great job in the last few years of being in the Champions League, and obviously getting to the Champions League final last season with under Pochettino. A lot's changed since then, but I think that's certainly going to be an issue for Spurs without Champions League football. Got a question from Alexa. Okay, not a question, just some gratitude. Thank you, Daniel, for your videos and all the effort you're putting in. So yeah, that's all the questions I think we have for the moment. I think I'm just going to mention just a couple of other points in terms of Manchester City now as well. Obviously, I'd mentioned that before, and obviously Manchester City now not being subject to the CAS ban or rather the UEFA ban is a very important move, because if that decision hadn't come out and fifth place could have been granted Champions League football, then obviously Leicester would have made that, particularly at Manchester City's expense. But now we have at least the press release that states that Man City aren't going to be banned. We're still awaiting the judgment, is at least my understanding of what's going on at present. But again, that judgment will be very interesting to see, i.e. the written reasons. And again, from Manchester City's perspective, obviously being able to be in competition is probably worth, in terms of revenue, at least 70, 80, 90 million euros by way of UEFA distributions, commercial distributions, and then match day revenues if people are able to get back into stadia sooner rather than later. And then obviously being able to attract and recruit players, and then obviously keep particular players. So, it's obviously been a very, very important few weeks for Manchester City. They've got a number of weeks ahead, is the truth now, because they've got Real Madrid coming to Manchester quite soon, beginning of August, which again leaves its own issues. I was thinking about that simply because I'm not sure if yet many of you guys know, but Man City, or rather flights into Spain from the UK, individuals now have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. Now, I don't know whether there are particular sporting measures that are being put in place at the moment, but there's certainly a query about whether individuals coming into the UK query whether they're being tested, whether they're being kept in biosecure zones, etc. Whether they would have to potentially stay in the UK for a particular period of time, or could fly in or out with what might have to be special governmental exemptions or otherwise. So watch the space for that, because obviously, as I mentioned, that Man City second leg is very important for then the what would effectively be the remaining Champions League games then to be played in short form over short form tournaments, and the implications that might have. So yeah, watch the space for that. Question from Augustin. When the Corona crisis started, I was afraid the player valuation bubble would explode. Did you fear the same? However, I think so far the industry has come out quite strong despite the large shock. Yeah, it's a great question. Very briefly, I think I would say there's definitely still going to be a realignment, a rebalancing, sort of a new equilibrium. There's obviously been some big signings, but I think outside of the top leagues, and even the top leagues will have issues, especially Ligue 1, for example, who weren't able to finish their season, along with the Belgium leagues and others. Whether there'll still be the same volume of deals, whether there'll be a reduction in the value of the deals, I think it's fair to say that we're certainly in a buyer's market, and those clubs that have money to spend, and for example, Chelsea have obviously spent significant amounts on Ziyech and Werner, possibly Heiritz as well from the Bundesliga. Liverpool foregoing the possibility, at least as reported, to sign Werner because they didn't know the financial position that they would be in. It may also be for particular sales out that maybe those even elite clubs felt that they were going to be able to recoup from particular squad players that maybe not coming and forthcoming now. But I think the real issues are in the divisions below, the EFL Championship, especially in League One and Two. If they can't get crowds in early next season, if they're not able to afford the costs for testing or otherwise, then there's definitely going to be tricky times ahead. The interesting part now is that, you know, the transfer window effectively opens sooner rather than later, that going until October, and then another domestic trading week on top of that come October, which gives you know, a significant window for those trades to happen. So it's all about that recirculation of money from the top downwards, and seeing what happens there. So yeah, well, thanks very much everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. I'm going to put this on YouTube so everybody can listen and watch in the days that follow, and look forward to speaking to everyone soon. Take care. Cheers.